On my 20th birthday, my mom handed me a trash bag and a one-way ticket. She said, "You're no longer one of us." 10 years later, they declared me dead. I walked into my own funeral. Shocking. I said, "Miss me. I'm Marceline." You know, most people worry about what their family will say at their funeral. But me? I watched my own mother read my obituary while I was still breathing. They declared me dead, held a church service, erased me from every photo, every memory, and I wasn't even invited. They sold my things, took my inheritance, rewrote the story like I never existed. And the worst part, they thought I'd never come back. But I did. It was an ordinary Thursday evening when my phone buzzed. I was halfway through folding laundry in my tiny apartment on the south side of St. Louis, the local news humming quietly from the TV. I almost ignored the notification. It was from Facebook Messenger. And let's be honest, who still uses that anymore? But then I saw the name, Shayla Boone. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. My old high school friend, the girl who once snuck me out to late-night bonfire parties behind the soccer field. My thumb hovered over the message Curiosity one. Her message was short. "Hey, is this really you? Thought you were dead?" I blinked at the screen assuming she'd mixed me up with someone else. But then I scrolled down and saw the screenshot she'd attached. A Facebook post. Black and white photo of me at 16. Below it in bold letters. "In loving memory of Marceline Cross, our beloved daughter, sister, friend, 1992-2013. My stomach dropped. I stared at the post like it was a bad joke, a mistake, somebody messing around. But the more I looked, the colder I felt. Under the photo was a comment. "We miss her every day. She left us too soon." It was posted by Celine Cross, my sister. No, this couldn't be real. I shot a message back to Shayla. "What the hell is this? I'm alive." "Who told you I was dead?" Her reply came instantly. "Your mom. They held a memorial service, a big one at church. I thought you died in a car crash." My hands froze. I read her message twice, then 3 times. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. It was one thing to be disowned, cut out, forgotten. It was another to be buried alive. Before I could even process what I'd seen, another message popped up. "Here, you need to see this," a YouTube link. I hesitated for a second, then tapped play. The video opened with the Cross Family Church logo, the soft of organ music in the background. The camera panned across the crowded pews, familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, cousins, my parents' friends, all dressed in black. Then it landed on her. My mother, Verna Cross. She stood at the pulpit composed, graceful as ever. Her voice echoed through the sanctuary. "Today, we gather to remember Marceline, a troubled soul who lost her way. She's gone now, but we pray she's finally found peace." I couldn't breathe. They didn't just cut me off. They declared me dead publicly in front of God and everyone. The video panned to the audience, faces I grew up around, people who used to hand me casseroles at church picnics, who smiled and nodded every Sunday. None of them questioned the lie. None of them looked surprised. I let the video play to the end. My mother's crocodile tears, my father's stiff posture in the front row, Celine's blank stare, the slideshow at the end, a montage of childhood photos of me, my kindergarten graduation, my awkward teenage smile, the last photo of me at 16. They all sat there and mourned a funeral that wasn't real. When the video ended, the silence in my apartment felt suffocating. I sat there staring at the dark screen, feeling something rise inside me. Like grief mixed with rage, grief twisted into something sharp. I wasn't supposed to see this. They'd buried me without a body, without a question, without a fight. For 12 years, I'd worked my way up from nothing, scrubbing toilets and diners, waiting tables on weekends, putting myself through school. I built a life in the shadows because I thought I had no choice, but now I knew. They hadn't just left me behind. They'd erased me. And the worst part, no one, not one single person had said a damn thing. The next hour blurred. I sat there replaying the video, reading the comments under that Facebook post. Cousins I hadn't seen in years writing things like, "She was always so troubled. We tried to help her. Her poor mother. Such a loss." I felt sick. I reached for my phone and typed out a message to Shayla. Why didn't anyone ask? Why didn't anyone look for me? Her reply was gut punch simple. "They said you didn't want to be found." That's when it hit me. They hadn't just killed me in words. They'd made me invisible. And they thought they could get away with it. I wiped my face, stood up from the couch, and walked to the window. The city lights of St. Louis glowed back at me, unaware, uncaring. But I was no longer the girl they buried 12 years ago. If they wanted me dead, fine. I'd come back as their worst nightmare. I stood by the window long after the city lights blurred into one another, long after the funeral video stopped playing in my head. The silence in my apartment pressed on my chest like a weight. I thought maybe if I stayed still enough I wouldn't feel it, that sickening emptiness, the ache of being wiped away. But stillness doesn't save you. It only gives the ghost room to scream louder. Eventually, I walked back to the couch and grabbed my laptop. The glow of the screen felt too bright in the dark, but I didn't turn on the lamp. I didn't want soft light tonight. I wanted the hard cold kind that showed everything. My fingers moved on autopilot. I opened the private folder I'd kept hidden all these years. Tucked away photos, old emails, scraps of memories I couldn't quite delete even when I wanted to. There I was smiling at my college dorm move-in day. Another picture of me and Shayla at a Halloween party covered in glitter, and one I hadn't looked at in years. Me at 19, hair tied up messily, sitting on the porch steps of the house I used to call home. That house. The place where everything ended. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and let myself fall into the memory. It was the night of my 20th birthday, spring of 2012. I had come home late, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd save me a slice of cake. Maybe I'd get a smile from my father or one of those half-hugs from Celine. Foolish hope. Instead, I walked in to find my mother waiting in the living room, arms crossed, lips tight. She didn't even let me speak. "You've made your choice, Marceline," she said, cold as marble. "And you're no longer one of us." Before I could ask what she meant, she shoved a black trash bag into my arms. Inside, my clothes, haphazardly thrown together, and a one-way bus ticket to Kansas City. "That boy isn't your future. We are, but you've chosen rebellion. So go." My father stood in the hallway behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. Celine leaned against the staircase, smirking like she was watching a soap opera. I remember the weight in my stomach heavier than the bag in my hands. "You're really going to throw me out?" I asked, voice cracking. My mother didn't blink. "You made this bed. Now lie in it." Outside the night was cold for April. I sat at the curb for a while, the bus ticket crumpled in my hand, wondering if I should tear it up. But where would I go? No one ever comes looking for the daughter they've buried alive. That night stayed with me longer than any scar. But I thought that was the end of it, being discarded, pushed out. Turns out it wasn't enough for them to exile me. They had to erase me. I leaned forward now, opening my laptop again. On impulse, I searched my own name. Nothing. No old photos, no tagged memories, no birthday wishes from years past. My high school graduation post, gone. Photos from our family trip to Yellowstone vanished. It was as if every digital trace of me had been scrubbed clean. I opened Celine's profile out of spite, scrolling through her curated picture-perfect life, posts about family holidays, her big promotion at the bank, the annual church fundraiser. Every caption dripping with sugar. "Grateful for my beautiful family. Wouldn't be who I am without them," as if I'd never existed. Scrolling further, I found something that punched me right in the gut. A post from 2014. A photo of my childhood bedroom, empty and stripped bare, captioned, "Cleaning out the past to make room for the future." I recognized the rug rolled up in the corner, the bookshelf my grandfather built, the one I used to line with borrowed library books. Gone. That's when I remembered a conversation I'd overheard on the night they kicked me out. Celine's voice muffled through the thin walls. "She brought this on herself. She's not family anymore." At the time I thought it was just anger. Now I knew it was something worse, something calculated. They hadn't just thrown me out, they'd erased me. The digital graveyard was complete. No trace of me anywhere. Every memory, every photo, every post deleted. A part of me wanted to slam the laptop shut and pretend I hadn't seen it, but the other part, the part they couldn't kill, kept me scrolling, digging, screenshotting everything I could find. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. As dawn began to creep through the blinds, I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the city waking up outside my window. Then I whispered to myself like a promise, "You wanted me erased, but I'm still here, and I'm coming back." The sun had already begun to rise by the time I stood up from the couch. My apartment was bathed in that soft, hesitant light that only comes at dawn, when the city hasn't fully woken up and everything feels fragile. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. My head buzzed like a radio stuck between stations, thoughts jumping from one to another without landing anywhere solid. The funeral video, the empty digital footprint, Celine's cold words, it all circled endlessly. I moved to the kitchen, made a cup of bitter black coffee, and sat back down at my desk. My laptop stared back at me, waiting. Part of me wanted to shut it, pretend this nightmare had ended with the sunrise, but I knew better. They wanted me erased. I was about to show them how badly they'd failed. Without thinking, I opened an old folder buried deep in my files, documents I hadn't touched in years. Bills, contracts, loan applications, rejection letters, a trail of my life back when I was building it from scratch. That's when I saw it. A loan application from 2018, denied. The reason stared back at me like a slap in the face. Applicant listed as deceased. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake. This was paperwork murder. I scrolled back through other letters, emails, old tax documents. 3 times over the years I'd been flagged as deceased in records. It had made no sense back then. I assumed clerical error, shrugged it off because I was too busy surviving to question it. But now knowing what I knew, it wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. I grabbed my coat without thinking, left the coffee half finished on the table. The early morning chill of St. Louis hit my face as I stepped outside. The streets were still quiet, city buses just starting their routes. By the time I reached City Hall, the building had only just opened. A clerk at the records desk greeted me with a bored smile asking how she could help. "I need a copy of a death certificate," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "A family member?" I swallowed. "Mine." The clerk blinked but didn't ask questions. She typed my name into the system, fingers clicking quickly against the keyboard. A minute later, she frowned then glanced up at me. "It says here you passed away in 2013. I felt like the floor cracked beneath me. She printed the document without hesitation and slid it across the counter. There it was. My name, my birth date, my supposed date of death, signed and filed by none other than Verna Cross. My mother, the cause of death, accidental, vehicular. The lie, neat and official, stamped with the city seal. I walked out of City Hall holding a copy of my own death certificate, the paper burning against my fingers. It wasn't until I reached the sidewalk that the second punch hit me. The inheritance? Back when my grandmother passed, she'd left something for me. A small trust fund. Nothing massive, but enough to start fresh. I tried to claim it when I was 21, but the lawyer had told me there was no mention of me in the records, that everything had gone to Verna and Celine. I hadn't thought much of it back then. I assumed my grandmother changed her will or maybe my mother made sure I was written out. But now I marched straight to the law office I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. Same gray walls, same stiff chairs, same receptionist with the same tired smile. The lawyer, Mr. Aldridge, barely remembered me at first, but when I told him my name and asked to revisit my grandmother's case, something shifted behind his eyes. "You know," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I always thought it was odd. You were supposed to be listed, but your mother provided proof of your death when the estate was processed." He pulled up the old files. There it was again. My death certificate used to legally remove me from the will. They hadn't just declared me dead. They'd stolen everything I was supposed to inherit, all because to them I was better off erased. I left the law office with copies of the documents tucked under my arm, my mind moving faster than my feet as I walked back to my apartment. By the time I stepped inside, the city was fully awake. The morning sun glaring through my blinds like it wanted to expose everything I'd uncovered. I laid the documents on my dining table, my death certificate, the loan rejection, the inheritance file, evidence, proof of what they'd done. They'd killed me on paper, but I was still here, and I was done letting them write the story. I pulled out my phone, opened the airline app, and booked a one-way ticket back to St. Louis. It was time to face the family who buried me alive. The plane touched down in St. Louis just before noon, the wheels rattling hard against the runway as if even the ground was reluctant to welcome me back. As I walked through the airport terminal, I kept my head low, sunglasses hiding the storm brewing behind my eyes. I hadn't set foot in this city in over a decade, but somehow everything felt exactly the same and nothing did. I rented a car at the curbside, the clerk barely glancing at me when I handed over my ID. I drove through the streets I once knew like the back of my hand, the skyline of the city looming in the distance sharp against the clear blue sky. It wasn't until I turned onto Kingsbury Avenue that my hands started trembling on the wheel. There it was, the old church, the place where they'd held my funeral. The Cross family church hadn't changed. Same red brick exterior, same white steeple scraping the sky. For a moment, I slowed the car, staring at the front steps where I used to sit after Sunday school, waiting for my father to finish small talk with the congregation. Now those steps were stained with a memory I couldn't scrub clean. I didn't stop. I kept driving past the familiar corner store, past the park where I used to sneak cigarettes behind the bleachers until finally, inevitably, I turned onto my childhood street. The Cross family house sat quietly at the end of the block. Same manicured lawn, same white shutters, the same rose bushes my mother pruned every Saturday morning, except now it felt like a tomb. I slowed but didn't park just enough to let my gaze linger on the front door, the one I used to walk through every day without realizing how quickly it could close behind me forever. As I drove past, memories pushed their way to the surface like unwelcome guests. It was late at night, the night Verna threw me out. I'd been standing in the living room holding that ridiculous black trash bag. My father across from me, Harlan Cross, the man who used to tuck me in with bedtime stories about brave girls who fought monsters. That night, he couldn't even meet my eyes. "Harlan." My mother barked at him, her voice sharp, cutting. "Say something to your daughter." He didn't. He stood there like a statue staring at the floor. shoulders hunched as if he'd shrink into nothing if he stayed still enough. I remember the taste of copper in my mouth, the panic rising like bile. "Dad," I whispered, hoping, begging for him to step in. "Stop this madness." He shook his head. "Your mother's right," he said quietly, voice hollow. "You've made your choice." That choice cost me everything. The memory faded as I pulled into the parking lot of a small motel off Del Mar Boulevard. I didn't want to stay anywhere too close to their world. The motel clerk barely looked up when I paid for 2 nights in cash. Once in my room, I dropped my bag on the bed and collapsed into the chair by the window, staring blankly at the afternoon traffic crawling past. The past wouldn't leave me alone, so I stopped trying to outrun it. I reached for my old phone, the one I hadn't used in years but still kept tucked in a drawer for reasons I couldn't explain. I powered it up, the battery barely clinging to life. I sifted through old voicemails, old texts, deleted folders. That's when I found them. A folder I didn't remember saving, messages from my father, unsent drafts, never delivered. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. Your mother, she's not making this easy. I wanted to call you on your birthday." I should have stopped her. Each message felt like a knife carving into old scars. He tried, but not enough. In my email drafts, there were letters. Awkward, clumsy apologies typed out, but never sent. Letters that stopped short of taking responsibility. "Your mother thinks I shouldn't talk to you. She says it's for the best. I hope you're safe wherever you are." I closed the phone and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He wasn't innocent, but maybe he wasn't heartless either. That night back in the motel, I sat at the small desk by the window, pen in hand, notebook open. I'd stopped writing in journals years ago, but tonight, the words needed somewhere to land. "Silence is a choice," I wrote, "and he chose to let me die." I closed the notebook gently like it contained something fragile. My phone buzzed against the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. A message from an unknown number. "Family anniversary party tomorrow. Everyone will be there." My heart stilled. It wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. Morning sunlight crept stubbornly through the thin curtains of my motel room, casting long stripes across the rumpled sheets. I hadn't slept well. My mind kept looping that message. Family anniversary party tomorrow. Everyone will be there. They called it a party. To me, it sounded like a funeral I hadn't agreed to. I reached for my phone the moment I opened my eyes. Notifications blinked in the corner of the screen. One stood out. A forwarded Facebook event from an unknown account. I tapped it open. 40th wedding anniversary, Verna and Harlan Cross. All family welcome. The banner photo was a picture of my parents in front of the church, arms around each other, smiling like they hadn't buried a daughter in lies. Below it, dozens of comments scrolled endlessly. "Congratulations to the most faithful couple we know. You've built a beautiful family. Celine is such a blessing." I searched the guest list. My name wasn't there. Of course, it wasn't. Beneath the RSVP section, there was a pinned comment from Verna herself. "So grateful for our only daughter, Celine, who's carried our family's legacy with grace and strength." The words hit like a slap. They didn't just delete me, they handed my entire existence to her. I scrolled deeper, fingers trembling with quiet rage. Celine's profile picture smiled back at me, polished and perfect, standing beside my parents like she was the sole product of their love, their pride. Further down, another post from Verna. "Not every family member stays on the right path, but we thank God every day for the one who never strayed." Beneath it, an outpouring of sympathy and praise. I tossed the phone onto the bed like it burned. Hours passed without me realizing. I drifted between pacing the room and sitting still, heart pounding with a kind of rage I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. By late afternoon, my phone vibrated again. A message from Milo, my cousin, one of the few who'd always kept his distance from family drama. "You need to see this." Attached was a photo of a folded piece of paper, typed and neatly formatted. Celine's speech. I zoomed in. "Today we celebrate not just our parents' enduring love, but the family they built. A family marked by resilience, faith, and loyalty. I stand before you as the daughter who stayed, the one who carried our name when others chose to leave." My throat tightened as I read. Every word was a dagger. She wasn't just erasing me behind closed doors anymore. She was standing in front of a crowd wearing my absence like a badge of honor. I messaged Milo back. "How'd you get this?" His reply was short. "Aunt Delphine sent it to me. She thinks you should know." I sat at the edge of the bed, the weight of it all pressing down like a boulder on my chest. They were about to celebrate a lie. Smile for photos, raise champagne glasses, tell the world how perfect they were, all while dancing on my grave. Enough. I opened the notebook I'd started last night, the one where I'd written about my father's silence. I flipped to a new page and scribbled, "You bury me once. Shame on you. You bury me twice. Watch what happens next." Then I grabbed my phone again and messaged Milo. Tell Aunt Elfin something for me. He replied instantly. What? Tell them this. If they keep burying me, I'll bring the whole graveyard with me. The sun dipped lower behind the motel blinds. I stood, moved to the table where I'd laid out my documents, the death certificate, the inheritance paperwork, screenshots of social media posts, copies of the speech Milo had sent me. I organized them neatly in a folder. If they wanted to put on a show tomorrow, I was going to give them an ending no one would forget. As night settled over St. Louis, the first sat by the mirror in the motel room tying my hair back. I looked at my reflection, not the girl they'd called troubled and rebellious, not the ghost they declared dead. A woman who had clawed her way back from nothing, who knew the truth. Tomorrow, I whispered to myself, my gaze steady. I show them who's really dead inside. By noon the next day, the city felt like it was holding its breath. The sun hung high over St. Louis, its spring warmth brushing over the streets as if nothing monumental was about to happen. I stood by the window of my motel room, folder in hand, dressed in black, not mourning, preparing. I'd spent the morning moving slowly, deliberately, ironing the creases from my dress, securing my documents in order, brushing my hair back neat and sharp, every move a declaration. I was alive, and I was done hiding. At precisely 1:30, I drove toward the Cross family home. The streets grew narrower, more familiar with every turn, and there at the end of Kingsbury Avenue stood the house that had once been my entire world. It looked almost staged, balloons tied to the front gate, a banner stretched across the driveway. 40 years of love, Verna and Harlan Cross. Cars lined the curb. People milled about on the front lawn holding champagne flutes, laughing in their Sunday best. From inside, I could hear music drifting out, light and cheerful. The smell of catered food and fresh-cut roses mixed with the sound of polite conversation. A perfect party, a perfect lie. I parked 2 houses down, stepped out, folder tucked firmly under my arm. As I walked toward the front door, no one noticed me at first. They were too busy smiling, too busy congratulating themselves. I stopped by the gate watching them. Verna floated from guest to guest like a queen at court, flawless in her navy blue dress, silver necklace resting perfectly at her collarbone. Harlan lingered in the corner, drink in hand, shoulders hunched like a man trying to disappear, and Celine, radiant in a pale yellow dress, stood front and center, beaming the family I'd been cut from the story they rewrote without me. I stood quietly for another moment breathing in the scene, then I pushed the gate open and walked in. No one noticed at first. The laughter didn't stop, but as I moved toward the front steps heads began to turn, and when Verna raised her glass the room fell into focus. Thank you all for being here. She began, her voice smooth as honey. 40 years of marriage is no small thing. And today we don't just celebrate love, we celebrate family. She glanced toward Celine, who smiled sweetly, knowingly. Some of us lost people along the way, people who lost their way. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We honor them too, and we give thanks for the daughter who never strayed. A ripple of polite nods swept through the crowd. And then, as if rehearsed, Verna unfolded a piece of paper from the pocket of her dress. I recognized it immediately. The same obituary she'd read at my funeral a decade ago. In memory of our beloved daughter, Marceline Cross, lost too soon but never forgotten. Her voice cracked at the right places. Eyes shimmered with manufactured grief. The performance was flawless until I stepped through the front door. The sound of the latch clicking echoed louder than her speech. Aunt Ruth dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the floor. A hush rippled through the crowd like an electric current. Verna froze mid-sentence, the obituary slipping slightly in her hands. Celine's smile faltered, her eyes locking onto mine. I took one step forward, then another, the folder clutched tightly in my hand. Sorry to interrupt, I said calmly, my voice carrying across the room. I wasn't sure if I needed an invitation to my own funeral. The silence was deafening. All eyes turned to Verna, then back to me. Some faces registered confusion, others horror. Verna's lips parted but no words came out. I walked forward slow and steady until I stood in the center of the room. You declared me dead, I said, voice steady. You held a service. You read my obituary at a church filled with people who clapped and nodded and prayed. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. But here's the problem, I continued, pulling open the folder. You can't bury someone who's still breathing. One by one, I laid the documents on the cake table. First, the death certificate stamped and signed by Verna's own hand. Then the inheritance file showing how I'd been erased to funnel money elsewhere. Next, the rejection letters marked deceased applicant. Finally, screenshots of social media posts, the obituary, the lies that had been repeated over and over. You told everyone I was gone, I said, turning to face them all. But I've been living, working, building a life while you were mourning a corpse you invented. The room remained frozen. No one moved. Verna's hand trembled against her glass. Celine stood rigid, mouth tight, gaze darting to the documents as if she could will them to disappear. Then from the back of the room a voice broke the silence. "You're not alone anymore." I turned. Aunt Delphine stood near the hallway, her eyes locked on mine. Beside her, Milo stepped forward too. A fracture began to split the room, clear and visible. Some faces turned toward Verna in doubt, others looked away in shame. The ghosts weren't staying buried. The family was about to split wide open. The silence that followed Aunt Delphine's words didn't last long. It cracked like thin glass under the weight of too many whispers, gasps rippling through the crowd. I could feel the room shifting, eyes darting between me and Verna, mouths half open in disbelief. Someone near the cake table muttered, "Is that really her?" Another voice, lower, more hesitant, "She's supposed to be dead." The murmur grew louder, rolling across the room like a wave ready to crash. Verna tightened her grip on her champagne glass. Her lips pressed into a line so thin it almost disappeared. Celine's stare hadn't left me. She looked like she'd swallowed glass, rigid, sharp, ready to cut. Aunt Delphine stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, the sound slicing through the tension. "I've stayed quiet long enough," she said, voice steady but strained. "It's true. Marceline's alive. She's been alive all these years, and we've all been part of the lie." A ripple of movement near the back of the room, some guests shaking their heads, others exchanging frantic glances. Verna's eyes snapped toward Delphine. "Sit down," she hissed, sharp enough to slice skin, but Delphine didn't flinch. "I won't." Next to her, Milo straightened, his gaze locked on Celine. "You did this," he said, voice louder now. "You helped them erase her. You sat back while they buried your own sister and called it righteousness." Celine's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Milo shot back. "I was there the night they cleaned out her room. You acted like she never existed." The crowd shifted again, this time with a noticeable divide. Some family members moved closer to Delphine and Milo, others drew tighter around Verna and Celine like soldiers readying for battle. Verna regained her poise like it was a second skin. She raised her chin, her voice slicing through the noise. "You want to talk about family?" she snapped. "Family doesn't betray their blood. Family doesn't abandon everything we stood for and come crawling back just to destroy what's left." I met her gaze without blinking. "You destroyed it yourself the day you decided I was easier to bury than to love?" The room erupted, voices overlapping. People arguing in corners, some already heading for the door. Years of polite smiles and Sunday prayers unraveling in real time. Celine stepped forward, her eyes burning. "You're only here to ruin everything. You always were the problem, Marceline." My fingers tightened around the folder in my hand. "No, Celine. The problem is that you believed your lies so long you thought no one would ever question them." I glanced at the crowd, some avoiding my gaze, others nodding quietly. "You erased me," I continued, voice cutting cleanly through the noise, "but I rebuilt myself. Without you. Without any of this." I laid the folder down on the table next to the half-eaten anniversary cake. "I didn't come here for your approval. I came here to bury your lies." A few family members clapped, hesitant but real. Others shook their heads, muttering beneath their breath. Verna's face remained carved from stone. Celine's eyes shimmered, not with tears, but rage. Then Verna leaned toward Celine, her words barely audible but sharp enough to slice. "If she wants a war," Verna whispered, her gaze still pinned on me, "we'll give her one." And just like that I knew. The real battle hadn't started yet. The next morning felt too quiet. I sat at Aunt Delphine's kitchen table, a chipped coffee mug warming my hands, the air thick with tension. The curtains were half drawn, letting in the soft light of a cloudy St. Louis morning. Outside birds chirped like the world hadn't cracked open the night before. Delphine stood at the stove stirring oatmeal she probably had no intention of eating. Milo sat across from me, scrolling through his phone but not really reading. None of us spoke at first. There wasn't much left to say. Finally, Delphine broke the silence. "They're not going to let it end like this." I nodded. "I know." Milo glanced up. "You ready?" I took a deep breath. More than ready. The phone on the counter buzzed. Delphine checked it and turned the screen toward me. A message from one of our cousins. "Family meeting today. 3 p.m. at the house. Mom says everyone's expected." A meeting. Of course, they'd call a meeting. You can't sweep a funeral crasher under the rug without a proper counsel. I set my coffee mug down. Let's give them the funeral they deserve. The hours leading up to it crawled by, but somehow by the time I stood again in front of the Cross family home that afternoon, it felt like I'd blinked and arrived. No balloons this time. No champagne. Just a driveway full of parked cars and heavy silence hanging over the lawn. Inside, the living room was packed. Verna sat stiffly in her armchair like a queen in exile. Celine stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. Harlan occupied the farthest corner of the room, eyes trained on the floor. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was there waiting. The door clicked shut behind me. No one smiled. Verna's voice sliced through the room first. "Let's get this over with." I stayed standing. "I wasn't here to sit politely. You want to talk?" I said, voice even. "Fine. Let's talk." Delphine took a seat near the fireplace. Milo hovered by the doorway. Celine spoke next, her tone brittle. "You've humiliated this family enough." I met her gaze without blinking. "No, Celine. You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided to erase me." The conversation spiraled quickly after that. Verna pointed a trembling hand at me. "You always wanted to tear this family apart. You've done it now. You tore it apart the day you signed my death certificate." I shot back, pulling out a copy and laying it on the coffee table like a weapon. "You decided it was easier to kill me on paper than face who I really was." The room stirred. I reached into my folder, laying out document after document. The inheritance paperwork rerouted to Celine's account. The loan rejections marked deceased. The social media posts. The obituary read in church like scripture. "You didn't just cut me out," I said. "You rewrote the entire story." All eyes shifted to Verna. She remained silent. Then, from the corner, Harlan's voice broke the tension. I knew. The words fell like a brick in the middle of the room. Verna whipped her head toward him. "Harlan, don't." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on me. "I knew what your mother did. I knew about the papers, the lies." His voice cracked raw. "And I did nothing." He finally looked up, voice breaking. "I was a coward." No one spoke. I swallowed, the lump rising in my throat forced my voice steady. "You let me die because it was easier." Harlan nodded. "Once a broken man." I took a step forward, letting my eyes sweep across the room. "Enough of this. I didn't come back to be forgiven. I came back to finish this." I reached for the last document in my folder, a formal legal complaint stamped and signed. "I filed charges," I said clearly, voice ringing through the room. "Fraud, falsifying government records, inheritance theft." Gasps erupted. Someone whispered, "She's serious." I wasn't finished. "And tomorrow," I added, "a journalist from the Post will be publishing the whole story. Every lie. Every document. You wanted to bury me? Now the whole world will know how you did it." Verna's face drained of color. Celine's lips parted. No sound coming out. Around the room, family members shifted uncomfortably. Some standing, some turning away. Verna sank back into her chair like the air had been knocked out of her. Celine, face flushed, spun on her heel and stormed toward the door. Before she reached it, I spoke one last time. "This isn't the funeral you planned." She stopped. "But it's the one you deserve." 1 week later, the streets of St. Louis felt quieter. I sat on the edge of my new apartment's balcony, coffee in hand, staring out at the skyline I'd once thought I'd never see again. The war was over, but the echoes of it still hummed under my skin. The fallout had been swift. Verna lost everything that mattered to her. Not the money that was untouched by the law, but the thing she valued more, the image. The church revoked her leadership roles. Her friends stopped calling. The community that had once hung on her every word now crossed the street to avoid her. Celine didn't fare much better. She took a leave from her job a day after the family meeting. The whispers in her workplace became unavoidable. The Cross family name used to mean something here. Now it meant betrayal. Harlan moved out of the house 2 days after I left. No fanfare, no goodbye. He left behind only a message forwarded to me by Delphine. "I failed you." There were no victors, just survivors. I took a slow breath, letting the morning air cool my lungs, and thought back to that family meeting. The day everything cracked open. It hadn't felt like winning, but it felt like the truth. That afternoon, I'd walked out of the Cross home and gone straight to the courthouse. The charges I filed against Verna hadn't earned her jail time. Forgery and fraud? Yes. But the law has a funny way of treating family crimes. She paid a hefty fine, was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service, but the real punishment wasn't legal. It was the empty pews at church on Sunday, the friends who stopped answering her calls, the names she couldn't clean. And me? I kept my promise. I told the whole world what they did. A month after the meeting, I launched the first episode of my podcast, The Girl They Buried Alive. I spoke into the mic in my small living room, voice steady but raw. I didn't just tell my story, I laid it bare. Every document, every lie, every silence. The downloads started slowly, then the messages came. Strangers from Ohio, California, Texas, women, men, people who'd been erased by their own families, each of them carrying their own scars, their own ghosts. Some nights I sat up reading their emails until the sun came up. I wasn't the only one. One evening, Milo came by with a bottle of wine and Delphine trailing behind him, holding a pie she'd baked herself. We sat around my tiny kitchen table, no speeches, no apologies, just laughter and long silences that didn't feel heavy anymore. At one point Milo raised his glass and said quietly to the ones who stayed, Delphine added, and the ones who came back. We ate, we laughed, we let the wounds breathe. Later that night, I stood by my window looking out at the city lights. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was the family I chose, and somehow that felt better. As dawn began to color the sky, I stepped out onto the balcony, letting the cool breeze brush against my skin. They tried to bury me, but I'd learned something about things buried deep. They don't stay quiet, they grow back stronger. I smiled faintly and whispered to myself, not for them, but for me. They buried me once, but I grew back. Before I close this chapter for good, I want to leave you with something. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's this. Family doesn't always mean protection. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who will bury you first, whether in silence, in shame, or in lies. But your worth is not defined by who abandons you. You are not the names they call you, the stories they rewrite, or the doors they slam shut behind you. You are who you decide to become when no one is clapping for you. I stood back up because I realized something powerful. No one can write your obituary but you. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to stand in the ashes of what they tried to burn and say, I'm still here. So let me ask you. Have you ever felt like someone tried to erase you? Have you ever been told you wouldn't make it, and yet here you are, breathing, standing tall? If this story touched something in you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment with a 1-inch if you've ever had to fight your way back when the world wrote you off, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story traveled. And if you didn't like this story, I want to hear that too. Tell me why. Tell me your story. Because here, your voice matters. And if you want more real, raw, unforgettable stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.